Welcome to Religion Unmuted, where we explore what religion sounds like with women's voices turned up. I'm Elaine Howard Eklund. I'm a sociologist and director of the Religion and Public Life program at Rice University. I'm joined today by three guests, Laura Olson, Bashir Mohammed, and Jamila Karim. Thank you to each of you for joining me to talk about religion, politics, race, and gender. The intersection of these topics, let me just say them again, religion, politics, race, and gender, carry a certain heaviness in this moment. This is especially true right now, just days out from the 2020 presidential election. Each of you enter this conversation with a unique and an incredibly important perspective for our listeners to hear. Laura, you're a political scientist. Bashir, you're a sociologist working in a major polling organization. And Jamila, you're a public intellectual, a researcher, and a writer. And you're all approaching politics in different ways. And I'm sure you're probably approaching religion in different ways. Laura, why don't we start with you? How do you think paying attention to religion and gender can help us understand our political landscape right now?
First, thank you, Elaine, for having me. These are incredibly important conversations right now. Approaching the election, there are, several levels at which the relationship between religion and politics matters and how gender is going to cut into that. First and most important piece from my standpoint as an observer of elections and a political scientist is that women are much, much more likely than men to say that they intend to vote for Joe Biden, and that gap is especially large among women who have college degrees. Who are the women who are less likely to vote for Biden? They are older, they are less well educated in the aggregate, and they are also more religious. And one thing we know about how strength of religious affiliation and frequency of religious participation affects vote choice is that the more religious you are, the more you tend to be driven toward both political conservatism and support for Republican candidates. And that's maintained even with President Trump in office.
Bashir, how about you? Let me turn to you, if I may. Could you respond to what Laura has just said?
Sure. I think Laura highlighted a lot of important dynamics that the data very clearly bear out. But I would want to circle back to a point that you brought up earlier, which is race. We talk about the relationship between religiosity and association with the Republican Party or political conservatism. That doesn't hold for Black Protestants. The overwhelming majority of Black Protestants are Democrats. And Blacks tend to be more religious than white. So race is another important aspect of this mix as we think through the ways in which gender and politics and religion intersect.
Yeah, and so when we're talking about religion and politics emerging together in a way that leads to more political conservatism, we're actually talking about white religion primarily.
I think that's right.
Jamila, I just want to turn to you for a moment. Maybe tell us what you're noticing about gender and its intersection with religion in this election season.
I am seeing women at the forefront in political activism. For example, with the Democratic National Convention, there were over 100 delegates, and I would say at least half, if not more, were women. And also, one of the delegates has formed a coalition called Muslim Delegates and Allies to increase or sustain communication and policy making among the delegates and allies. And she's a woman, so it's a female-led coalition. So I'm seeing that. I'm also seeing the ways that women especially are using prayer as a tool for their activisms. Just last night, I was doing a class. Well, I'm doing a class on Africa in the Quran, and I'm co-teaching the course. So the topic of the course was Joseph in the Quran. So after the course, there was Q&A, and most of the questions related to the topic. But there was one woman who asked that we pray for Breonna Taylor. And so I'm noticing the women not only using prayer as a tool, but bringing politics into sacred spaces like this Quran class.
Thank you. That's so important to hear. I want to talk a little bit more about data. All of you have data, different kinds of data, and approach data in different ways. You're really an all-star panel in that way. Thank you. Laura, let's start with you again. As a political scientist, is there anything else you want to tell us about how gender and religion have typically had an impact on voting behavior?
One thing that needs to be said is that non-white women, especially Black women, as our other panelists have pointed out, already were much, much more likely to be Democrats, even when they're not liberal, right? So many African Americans in particular aren't especially liberal on a lot of socio-moral issues, especially those who are more religious. But in the context of American politics, your identity as a person who isn't white in the aggregate plays a bigger role in your vote choice than would be until relatively recently the case for white people. But some of the factors that we're going to need to think about in taking stock after the election of both the effect of gender on vote choice and then also how these various other factors, religion and rural, urban, suburban, and various other kinds of things might cut in are, first of all, the potential backlash. There already is a backlash, but the potential backlash against President Trump and Judge Amy Coney Barrett is very socially conservative. And that might be a factor that could either certainly generate a lot of counter mobilization, but might also in some way give evangelical white women who maybe kind of secretly don't like Trump, maybe the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett and the, from all appearances, likelihood that there's going to be 6 conservative justices on the Supreme Court. Maybe that gives some of these women an opening to say, the court is taken care of for now. I might not like Trump. Maybe I sit this one out.
It's an excellent point, a really excellent point. And is abortion the one issue for these folks? That's what I've been wondering. Is that the sense that you're getting from the best polling data?
I don't think it's the only issue. We asked that question about, what issues are very important. And many people said abortion. Evangelicals in particular were likely to say abortion. But, the economy and terrorism were higher. They were still more likely to say the economy is their number one choice or terrorism is their number one choice. But then they were more likely than any other group to say that abortion is, or the Supreme Court specifically is a very important factor.
Another thing, of course, is the presence of a woman of color on the ticket on the Democratic side. Maybe, here we have another opportunity not to have a woman president, but to have a woman vice president. And COVID is something we should think about as well, because the sense that I have is that the burdens of COVID are landing especially hard on women, and especially on women who are not white.
I would say COVID and healthcare are really key. But even before that, I would say what I'm really hearing people emphasize is voting and voter turnout. So really raising awareness about our power and that we do matter. And especially for communities that have a lot of skepticism and critiques of the American government and the ways that both, Democratic and Republican parties or presidents have not really addressed our issues, or not a lot has changed, or some of the standpoints on foreign policy. So that's why that awareness and that push for the vote is also so critical for this community. And so after that, I would say definitely the social justice issues. Again, to mention Breonna Taylor, looking at the ways that these social injustices affects women in particular. There's, for Muslim communities, definitely, there's concern about the hate crimes and Islamophobia. Feminism is also another kind of controversial position in our communities, both Black and immigrant, because a lot of times even feminism has been used against our faith, right? In the stereotypes of Muslim women not being progressive and needing some kind of saving from white women. So when you're starting to see Black Muslim women, Egyptian, Palestinian American Muslim women, posting about the passing of Justice Ginsburg, then it's like they're kind of saying, hey, I am aligned with these issues and being very vocal about it. So it's definitely a really fascinating, important moment.
As a social scientist, I kind of come to this conversation aware that many people in the academy, but more broadly, many are critical, deeply critical about religion and the power that churches in particular, and I use the word church here very intentionally, the power that churches have wielded in politics. And I want to hear from each of you on this. Laura, maybe let's start with you if we could.
Yes. So everything Bashir says helps contextualize just so many of the things that we're thinking about here. One thing I would say in terms of building on what he said is that we see increasingly in this country this notion of negative partisanship. And what negative partisanship is, and we see this among people in all kinds of different demographic categories, that folks are more likely to say, I am voting for the party candidates that I'm voting for because I want to stop the other party's candidates, right? So this is a reflection of this deep, profound polarization that we have in our country right now. And because, as Pew has shown, because people who are sort of in the Republican conservative silo, as it were, sort of have learned through very clever sort of marketing strategy on the part of the Republican Party over decades, right? This has been a real long-term strategy on their part of portraying themselves as the brand that's better, in quotes, for people of faith. And thereby sort of painting the Democratic Party as the party that is hostile to religion. And to be fair, part of the Democrats have had to, as the percentage of unaffiliated Americans has increased, the Democratic Party has had to sort of be real careful about how they sort of do religion, as it were. They can't just sort of say, here we are, we're people of faith, bam, done. Because you don't want to alienate that growing sector of the electorate who are not religious, right? So there's this negative partisanship piece, and what that ends up doing is, as I see it, it fuels the sense among people of faith who are Republican that not only is the Democratic Party anti-religion somehow, but that it's deeply, profoundly evil.
I think the key difference isn't necessarily among people who are religious. Are they more religious or less religious? But that in general, comparing white Americans writ large and Black Americans writ large, Black Americans writ large tend to be more religious. And that holds whether you measure that by affiliation, whether you measure that by attendance, by a variety of standard measures, by frequency of prayer, by a variety of measures that we use. We see that Black Americans are more likely to be religious than white Americans.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they're also more likely to be Democrats.
Yes.
Pretty obvious too, right? Yeah.
And they are more likely to be Democrats, absolutely.
That's right. And so I guess sometimes folks will say the Democratic Party needs to get religion, to appeal to a broader base of voters. I guess I'm wondering if it already has it and it's not really honoring it or recognizing it as it should.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to the race question, right? I mean, what often people are talking about is white Christians.
That's right.
And where are religious white Christians? And how comfortable do religious white Christians feel? Because religious Black Americans, religious Black Christians have no problem with being part of the Democratic Party, even though they may object to certain issues. Whether it's same-sex marriage was an issue that came up, and among Black Protestants there was more resistance to the move to legalize same-sex marriage than there were among, say, religiously unaffiliated whites. But the fact is that among religious Blacks, there's not a need to justify, well, why are you a Democrat? Like they're just, it's understood. Like that's actually where most Blacks are. To Laura's point, that the Democratic Party has a lot of non-religion in it in a way that the Republican Party doesn't. So it may not be politically wise to alienate that sizable base, that sizable and growing base. We do see that the number of people who are religiously unaffiliated has been growing over the recent years, and most of them are finding a home in the Democratic Party and not in the Republican Party.
Well, I'll just say that what Bashir said just really explains why Muslims are Democrat, because they're in a party where, for the most part, welcome. You know, they're not fully heard and seen as they would like to be, but it's going to be the party because of this openness or this appeal to unaffiliated religious groups that Muslims are going to find a home there, because they're not going to be targets of anti-Muslim bigotry and hate in that party. But also just for their mere religious survival, they are against the rhetoric of Republicans, and particularly of President Trump, because, again, like, they're anti-Muslim, they're Islamophobic, they're for the Muslim ban.
I know this is something that social scientists are really hesitant to do, but if you could be transported a year into the future, so this is more imagination than data, what kind of conversations do you hope the American public will be having about religion, gender, race, and politics?
Wow. I sure would love to go and find out how this all turns out, that's for sure. One thing that has been on my mind as I've been listening to my colleagues speak is sort of this question of how people of faith across the spectrum might react if there's any kind of uncertainty or any kind of, frankly, monkey business around the result of the presidential election. And it seems to me that Joe Biden is in a good position to take the lead on that, because he's a devout Catholic, because he is steeped in Catholic social teaching. Maybe he can use some of those kinds of messages and use that to reach out to people of faith who are not, first of all, who are not white. Second of all, who are maybe not Christian. And third of all, who might be sort of nothing in particular religiously, but nevertheless still care about kindness and fairness and preventing harm, right, from coming to our society and from coming to its members. What I'm hoping is that we're in a situation where a lot of this sort of churning anxiety that our society is in right now and will remain in at least for another 2 months, I hope that some of that has calmed down. I hope that maybe we're dealing with COVID a year from now in a way that is more organized and more sensible, and right, that we have some kind of leadership around that speaks to the importance of everyone rather than just the individual and that person's freedom.
Bashir, Jamila, maybe Bashir, what do you want to do in the thought experiment? So if you two could look ahead, what kind of conversations would you hope the American public would be having about religion and race and gender and politics?
Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit and tell you what poll I want to do. Because the question that I would want to see answered isn't necessarily about the conversations, but about sort of the direction of progress. I'd like to know if people a year from now feel like, okay, we've done the stuff that we needed to do. You know, we had unrest for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever it was. And now here we are on the other side, and yay, we've done it. Or are people feeling like, no, we've still got more work to do? And if they feel like there's still more work to do, are they coming out of this period of unrest feeling more optimistic or less? Because I could see that going either way. I could see a summer of protests that ends with no structural change, resulting in people feeling demoralized. Like, I was out there and I was protesting and I was doing the thing, and here we are, something else has happened again. Or I could see the reverse. And so I'd like to see, do people feel like we're A, we need to continue to make progress, and B, are we on the trajectory to continue to double down on that commitment?
I would like robust conversations around the criminal justice system, around education, around housing and the homeless and the poor. And I would like those conversations to be led by people of all different faith backgrounds, to be led by the poor, people of color, the people who are suffering. And I would like to see among those leaders also those who have benefited from a lot of the changes or policies that are already occurring to improve lives of marginalized groups. So I would like to see, I guess it's kind of collaboration of all of us and those who are, traditionally have been in power, right? Because we can't do it we cannot do it alone. And we can only make a change when all of us realize how all of us are impacted and affected. So when I think about under-resourced schools and how they tend to be in predominantly Black neighborhoods, I think about how those schools would never change unless there are people with wealth, when there are white people in those communities. And we see that happening. We see gentrified communities that all of a sudden their schools improve because those resources have come into our communities. So when I see that trend, I realize that that's the only way that we can do it, is that when we're actually in community and we understand that all of us are impacted, that all of us care about our education, about our lives. And so that's what I hope. I hope we're having conversations and real conversations in community where people are actually living together. And I hope to see those sustained. And I only can see those really sustained if we're actually living together.
That's it for this episode of Religion Unmuted. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to, rate, and review us wherever you listen. Follow us on Twitter at RiceRPLP. Thanks to our guests, Jamila Karim, Laura Olson, and Bashir Mohammed. Today's show was written by Pamela Prickett and Rachel Schneider. Our producers are 3 Wire Creative and Daisha Clay. We had support from the Henry Luce Foundation. I'm Elaine Howard Eklund. Until next time.